Hey everyone, welcome to Exercise Check. In this video, we're going to be going over OMG the ORM in 17.4. So let's get started. So as always, we come to the launch code website and we go to 17.4, the exercises. And for this exercise, we're going to be continue building on our coding events application. The exercise instructions assume that we resemble the code in the persistent controller branch of the coding events demo. So we're going to have to create a branch of our own persistent controller code to get started with these exercises. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I come over to IntelliJ. I already have my coding events application open. I come down to the persistent controller. I'm going to say new branch, and I'm going to say exercise 17 and press create. Perfect. Going back, I do want to call out that if you haven't watched the movies yet in this exercise, I highly recommend doing so before you continue on this one. So now let's go down to 17.4.1. We need to create the event category class. It needs to have a few things inside of it. So let's go ahead and do that. It says we need to create this event category in the models directory. So let's begin. Go to the models directory, right click, new, Java class, event category. Referring back, I'm going to copy exactly what I need inside of this class so I don't forget. So first things first, it says we need an ID field of type int. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So private int and then ID. The second thing we need to create is a name field. So I'm going to say private string name for that one. Perfect. Now we need to create a constructor. I'm actually going to create two constructors here. The first one is going to be public and then the name of our class, which is event category. And then take in the name parameter. There we go. This dot name equals name. And then the second one I'm going to create is just a blank constructor here. Perfect. There we go. And then the appropriate getters and setters. So I'm going to right click and press generate. And then I'm going to say, I'm going to do just a getter for the ID here. And then I'm going to do a getter and setter for the name. There we go. We've completed these fields. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this. Going back to our instructions, it says event category represents the data that will be stored in our database, so you need to use the entity annotation. Okay, sounds good. Let's go back over here and we're going to use that entity annotation. There we go. Perfect. So on to 17.4.2, the event category repository interface. Once we've created that event category class, we need to create the event category repository in the data folder. The event category repository will extend event category. All right, sounds good. Let's go ahead and go back. And now we're going to go into the data here. So I'm going to right click new Java class. And remember that repositories should always be interfaces. So we say event category repository. There we go, perfect. So in here, we always know that our repository should extend the CRUD repository. Inside here, we need to tell it what exactly are we going to be storing inside of this repository. What's the actual class name? In this case, we just created the event category repository to store event categories. Therefore, what I'm going to store here is the event category. The second parameter in here is what the primary key will be. In majority of our examples, if not all of them, we always have integers as our primary key, those IDs. So I'm going to say integer here with a capital I. Perfect. So one more thing I'm going to do here, now that I dictated that I want my primary key to be an integer, I'm going to go back to event category, and I'm going to do that real quick. I'm going to use the annotation ID to say, this is my primary key, this integer right here. And the second thing I'm going to do is because I don't want to have to increment, or I don't have to set these IDs by myself, I'm going to say generate value. Perfect. So now with these annotations, we're telling Hibernate that this ID here in event category is going to be both the primary key and I want it to be generated automatically for me, aka auto incremented, something that we saw back in our SQL chapters. So perfect, we're getting this set up. Let's see what else we have to do. So we're on here to 17.4.3, the event category controller class. So create the event category controller in the controllers directory. Let's go ahead and do that real quick. Come to here, the controllers, right click, new Java class, and then press enter. Perfect. Coming back here, it says you can use the request mapping annotation to map to event categories. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go back to my controller and the very top, I'm going to say request mapping, and then in here, place the route I want this controller to be at, which is event categories. Perfect. To get our handlers working, we also need to create a variable of event category repository type. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I come down here, I'm going to say private, my event category repository interface I just created, and then call it event category repository, semicolon. Import that class, and perfect. It looks like we'll be creating 3 handlers in our controllers: display all events, render create event category form, and process create event category form. So let's go ahead and copy these 3 here and bring them over to IntelliJ. All right, so let's go ahead and get to it. So we say public string, and then the first one we're going to do is display all events. Right now I'm going to have no parameters inside of my parentheses, and then I'm going to return empty string until I know exactly what I want to actually return. But I do know that a mapping will always return a string, so that's why I put that return type in there. Next, it says display all events. So I know that this is going to be a get mapping because that's when I display. So I'm going to say get mapping. Right now I don't exactly know the route, so I'm going to leave that blank. Let's go ahead and keep going. The next one is render create event category form. So I'm going to copy that, say public string again, and actually that name. No parameters in our parentheses just yet, and we're going to return empty string. Render is another way of saying displaying. So I'm going to go ahead and put a get mapping on this one as well, with no route attached to it just yet until I know more about it further, but I do know it's going to be a get mapping. At least I hope so. Next, I'm going to do public string, and then of course this process create event category form here. There we go. And this one says process, meaning we're going to be doing something with all the information that's coming in here. So what I'm going to do is say a get post. So that sounds like more of a post mapping, doing something or an action after something happens on our website. So great, we have created these 3 methods. I'm going to remove that and go back to our instructions. So it looks like it gives us a little bit more detail about each individual method that we're going to have to do here. So display all events. Display all events needs to do the following. Use a get mapping, awesome, that's what we did, to return event category / index. So this is our route right here. So I'm going to copy index, go back here, and this is what I'm going to put in here. I've just put an index because up here we have a request mapping for event categories. So this will append on whenever we get down here. So all good there. Let's see what else. Add an attribute for the title that uses all categories. Okay, so it says it wants an attribute. I'm going back here. Once I know how to add an attribute, I need something to my parameters, the model. Import that class and model.addAttribute, and it said it wants to add a title that says all categories. Cool. There we go. Let's go back. And it says add an attribute for the categories that uses all of the values in our event category repository. Okay, sounds good. So let's copy the actual attribute name that it wants us to save it by. We'll say model.addAttribute categories. And now it's time to use that event category repository. So let's say event category repository dot find all, because we want all of the categories back. Perfect. There we go. We still don't know what view exactly to return here, so I'm going to keep leaving that blank for just right now. All right, on to 17.4.3.2, render create event category form. Use a get mapping, awesome, that's what we did also on the create. So we need to put our route in as create here. Let's go ahead and do that. Down here, quotes, create, perfect. All right, add an attribute for the title and assign it create category. Okay, sounds just like last time. So I'm going to use that code up here. So it wants us to create a title again. It says create categories. Oh, it's actually singular. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that and go back. And then it looks like I am missing something. We need to put model in here. There we go. Now everybody's happy. Add an attribute for the new instance of event category. Well, we've seen this before. We'll go back here. We'll say model.add attribute, and then we'll say new event category here with, again, those empty quotes. Perfect. So now we're creating a new instance and passing it to add attribute. Remember by default that it will be calling it event category as its attribute name because we just passed in the class there. And by default, it takes the class name and uses that as the attribute name. So we're all good here. Let's keep going. On to 17.4.3.3, process create event category form. So it needs to do the following: use a post mapping, which we already have done, use error validation and the errors object appropriately. If you want to review how to use the errors, go ahead and go back to error validation. So let's go ahead and put that in there right now. So we'll say errors and errors, and then model and model. Bring in the errors class there. Perfect. All right, so we're going to handle this appropriately. So just by default, I like to put if errors dot has errors. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to return back to our index here. So I'm going to redirect back here to event categories at the index. Awesome. All right, add an attribute for the title and assign it create category. Okay, so it looks like we had to add that title attribute once more. We did that up here, so I'm just going to copy this line and bring it down. There we go, perfect. Keep going. Add an attribute for the new instance of event category. So let's go and do that. We did that as well in the last one. So copy this. There we go. All right, so it says either return event category / create or a redirect. Okay, so on a success, I'm gonna go ahead and return this. Additionally, set up here that I didn't want us to put this full thing in here for the redirect, so I'm gonna do this. Take that out, perfect. All right, and now to finish our exercise, we need to make two new templates, the event category / index and the event category / create. And it tells us what each will contain. All right, let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is come into here in templates and I'm going to create a new directory called event categories. So in here is where we're going to place index and create. So I'm going to go ahead and just create two new files right now. I'm going to say index.html. I'm going to say create.html. Going over to index.html, I like to get the lower hanging fruit done first. So in the index.html, according to the exercise, we need to create a table here. The lucky thing is that down here in events.index.html, if I just copy this code here, it already has a table created. So I'm just going to utilize this. So I'm going to go from the top down, just making sure that I have everything I need and removing anything I do not need. So it looks like we have everything right now in our body, our header, we have our classes here, and up here, I'm going to remove description, contact email, and type. We do in event category though, have ID and name. So I'm going to keep that. And then additionally, I'm going to come down here and remove all of that stuff as well. Moreover, now I have to use the attributes that I'm actually passing into this template. So let's go back to the event category controller and see what I'm passing in for index. Looks like the attribute name for all of those event categories is actually called categories. So I'm going to come back over to the index.html here and say categories instead. And I'm going to just call this category singular to keep it consistent with our naming convention. There we go. I changed everything to category here. Perfect. Even better, now we know exactly what route to change our controller to. We know this is going to be event categories / index. There we go, perfect. Now let's go ahead and do the create. So we know the create is going to include a form here. So let's go ahead and do that. We also know that in the create down here for event, we also have a form. So just like last time, I'm going to copy all of this and bring it back into our create.html. Again, from top to bottom, I'm going to go see what I can remove or what I need to add. So we come down here, see everything is good, form group, perfect. And here's the first thing I need to change. I know that my class is going to be passed in as event category. So I'm going to say event category here instead of event. Remember, by default, our program is going to use the name of our class as the variable name here in TimeLeaf. So that's why I'm going to change these. We are going to have a name, so that should stay. We're not going to have a description, so I'm going to remove that. Same with contact email. We're not going to have that either. Finally, it looks like we're not going to need type either, so I'm going to take that out as well. We will need our submit button, so that's going to stay. And it looks like, as of right now, everything looks good. So let's go back to our controller and make sure everything's hooked up. It looks like we need to place something in here for our get. So we're going to say event categories / create. Awesome. And it looks like coming down here to my post mapping, I think I have it a little bit backwards here. If there are errors, I need to actually tell them to go back to the create here. If everything is a-okay, then I'm going to say go ahead and move on to index. Look at your category that you just created. Awesome. So one thing we haven't done yet is test anything. So let's go back to our instructions just briefly and see if we need to do anything else, and then we'll move on from there. Going over here, we did our timely templates. So now the final application. Once we're all done, we need to launch that app. So it looks like we are ready to start going. So let's go ahead and come back here. One last thing that I have not done yet is actually create the schema nor a user in my database. So before I do anything, what I'm going to do is open up MySQL Workbench. So I come in here and I go into my local instance. I log in and I go back to my schemas here, and I need to create a coding event schema. So I come up here and click on this icon. I'm going to say coding events, because I actually need this application somewhere to save all this data. I click apply again, and it's all finished. Up here, I'm going to click administration. Go to users and privileges. And now I need to add an account. I'm going to create an account for coding events. So I'm going to call the user coding events. Down here, I'm going to remove this wildcard and put localhost. The password here is going to be the default that we've been using in the exercises, which is going to be learn to code with an exclamation point. All right. Finally, go to schema privileges, add entry, select the schemas, just coding events, press OK, and then select all. I want access to everything here, and then click apply. There we go. My coding events user is now created. Perfect. Going back to our code, we need to double check application properties. It was coding events, learn to code. Those are my two things I needed to do. And then this is where my schema can be found. Everything else looks great. So now we're ready to run it. Do remember, it takes a little bit more time for Hibernate to actually kick in and help us do stuff. So our compilation here might be a little bit longer than normal. And we're all started. Perfect. Let's go ahead and open up a new browser. Let's go and open up a new tab, localhost 8080/event categories. All right, so it looks like we're getting back a 404. So we might have an error there. So let's go ahead and look back at our code. So going over here, the first things first is that if I went to event categories directly, there is no blank get mapping. So I'm going to go ahead and remove index from those quotes, so we just have somewhere exactly to go if someone just goes directly to event categories. The second thing I forgot is one very obvious thing is up here we say at controller. Perfect. And then it looks like it's just annotation errors on annotation errors, because down here I should put auto wired. There we go. So now with that, Let's go ahead and refresh. There we go. Come over here and let's refresh this. There we go. Now we're starting to see all categories and everything else. Perfect. This is more what we want to see. So going back to the instructions, it wants us to add meetup. So let's go ahead and do that. So we need to go to coding events / create. It wants us to put in meetup and then press create. Looks like we're getting back a 405 now. The request post is not supported. So let's hop back to our code and see what's going on. Coming down here, it looks like I didn't create a route for our post mapping. It should be at the route create there. So all good. We just need to correct this annotation. So let's go ahead and then restart our server now and try it again. All right, so now when we rerun it, we're getting back this status 500. We are having an issue because we're sending back a model, but the request body is not actually taking in anything. Let's go back over here and we're going to go ahead and see that. So we are only taking in the errors in the model, but we're not actually taking in our attributes. So we're going to use that model attribute, say event category, and I call it event category. Awesome. So once we add that attribute in there, now it's actually working, but we're not getting back any information here. So we need to go a little bit further. So coming back here, first thing we need to do is that this title and actually this new model event category here, we can actually put that up here. We're not going to need that down here. If it has errors, then we want all of that to repeat. So that should actually go in that if statement. Down here is where if everything is A-OK, aka there are no errors, then we need to add this information into our database. So to do that, we're going to say event category repository dot save, and then the entity that we're actually going to save. In this case, it's going to be event category. There we go. So let's go ahead and try to rerun this now. Come over here, we're going to refresh. Let's see if we can get it. Say / create. I'm going to say meetup. And perfect. Now we have actually our ID 1 and our name meetup actually being saved inside of our database. This is awesome to see. Let's double check it real quick in our MySQL database to make sure everything is working. We're going to go back to schemas, go to coding events. We're going to refresh here. And now we see we have 3 tables, 2 very important ones, event and event category. Here we're going to query our event category. And we see now that 1 and meetup are there. This means our information is actually coming over. This is a great thing to see. One more thing to ask. So what if we go to create and we don't type in anything? We don't want to send back null or empty information back to our database just to take up space, because a blank space typically isn't a good category for our events. So let's go ahead and add some validation. Let's go back over here. And the first things first is that if we're going to start validating our model attributes, we need to do @valid. There we go, perfect. Moving on, going to event category, now we need to actually add some validation here. We're going to say not blank. We're going to say the size has to be larger than 3 letters, just for some different validation. So great, once we add this, we go back to our controller and everything is good. Let's go ahead and rerun this and try it again. All started. Come over here to localhost. We're going to go back to create here, refresh. There we go. We're going to say networking for this one and press create. Perfect. And one more time, we're going to say create and check out our validation. Now we're going to say just create, and everything came back, looks good. It did not take us back to our index and show us that there was blank information. It actually redirected us right back to create to say, hey, you need to actually type in something here. Let's go ahead and just put a character in here. Press create, and it looks like it just keeps repeatedly coming back to here to create. So we're all good. This validation is actually working. So awesome to see. Let's hop back to our instructions. We did meetup, And now if you click on create category, you should be directed to the localhost create categories create. Okay, so it looks like it actually wants us to add the create category URL and the all categories URL to the header. So let's go ahead and do that. Coming back here, we need to go to our fragments, and then we see our headers here. The two headers that it wanted us to create was all categories and create category. Awesome. So let's go ahead and get those URLs edited. So it should be event categories. And then this one should just be the index. So I'm just going to take out that. And then the second one should be event category / create. Perfect. Save that and refresh. Perfect. We're going to go back here, come back here, refresh, cancel. Let's go ahead and just go back to our index. Awesome. Now we're seeing all events, a create event, delete event, all categories, and create category. That works, and everything else seems to keep working. Call it last category, create it, and everything seems to keep working. Awesome. And scrolling through everything, it looks like that is the last thing here we needed to do. That being said, we are all finished with this exercise. Awesome job working up to the end. I hope you enjoyed actually connecting your database now with your Java server and Spring using Hibernate. Thanks for watching.